Dean, dear Professor Kneip, dear Professor Kornia and Professor Günther, ladies and gentlemen, and dear Professor Klasen. It is an honor for me to welcome you all today on behalf of the Presidential Board of the Georg August University of Göttingen to your farewell lecture, dear Professor Klasen. Unfortunately, this farewell lecture comes much earlier than expected. Your regular retirement would be in 15 years, but sadly, your illness forces you to retire way too soon. Dear Professor Klasen, as a researcher and lecturer, you have not only left visible and lasting traces at the Faculty of Business and Economics, but also at the University of Göttingen and far beyond, touching and influencing many lives, many researchers with your tireless commitment and enthusiasm in the field of development economics. The best illustration of this fact is probably the presence of so many colleagues of yours today. I therefore would like to very much welcome you, dear colleagues, former students and friends of Stephan Klasen, to this farewell event. I know that many of you have traveled far to personally attend this farewell event. So I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to all friends, colleagues, and former PhDs of Stephan Klasen from Canada, the United States, Mexico, Ghana, Ethiopia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, and Pakistan. It was a stroke of luck for the University of Göttingen that we were able to win Stephan Klasen. In 2003, Professor Klasen was offered a C4 professorship at the University of Göttingen almost exactly 17 years ago. Stephan Klasen then took up the position the following year. Already at the beginning of his career at Göttingen University, it became clear that Stephan Klasen was a special and extremely committed person who wanted to make a lasting difference. Stephan Klasen had already decided in the appointment negotiations to forego many things that would have better equipped his own professorship. Instead of demanding further staff positions, he preferred to use his funds to set up a junior professorship. In this way, he began from the very beginning to strengthen the development economics in Göttingen as a key topic and to expand the working group. Today, a total of 4 professorships, 2 junior professorships, and 2 extraordinary professorships within the Department of Economics work in this field, which is by far one of the best in Germany, but also in Europe. You, Professor Klasen, have made this happen. And for your achievement, the Foundation Council of the University of Göttingen honored you in 2016 with its special award. But you have not limited yourself to working within your faculty. You have also developed close networks within the university, especially through the establishment of the Courant Research Center, Poverty, Equity and Growth in Developing and Transition Countries. You have successfully built up cooperative relationships with the Faculty of Agricultural Sciences and the Faculty of Mathematics and Computer Science, which continue to this day and I'm sure will continue to exist for a long time. I know that the Dean, Professor Kneip, will address the Courant Research Center in his speech as well, so I won't get into detail now. But allow me a personal comment. Dear Professor Klasen, you may remember that I was present in person when your Courant Research Center was selected in the first Excellence Initiative. This was a great moment for the university and for you in person. And I must say it was a great pleasure for me to be able to accompany this successful Courant Center as I was Vice President for Research back then. Numerous other successes followed. You were involved in collaborative research centers and in research groups. Your reputation continued to grow, and you became a much sought-after specialist in your research field and as a political consultant. This is best illustrated by your appointment to the UN Committee on Development Policy by the UN Secretary General and your participation in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for the 5th Assessment Report. But you have not limited yourself to passing on the knowledge you have acquired through your excellent research to society, business, and politics. You also wanted to support young and talented scientists who then themselves could pass on and impart the knowledge. In this context, I know that you were pleased to work in the DFG Research Training Group, Globalization and Development, a joint research training group of the University of Göttingen and Hannover. Dear Professor Klasen, many of your students now hold important positions not only in science, but also in non-governmental organizations and in other fields. This shows that you have been able to build up a network of brilliant graduates inside and outside the University of Göttingen who are all able to disseminate the knowledge in their own way and their own fields. I'm also very pleased personally that not only many of your pupils are gathered here today, but one of them, Professor Günther of ETH Zurich, a former research assistant and doctoral student of yours, will also speak from her own perspective. Dear Professor Klasen, I very deeply regret the sorrow that you and your family have suffered because of your illness. However, I would like to thank you for your unremitting dedication and commitment which you have always maintained. You have had a lasting and positive influence on the University at Göttingen and still continue to do so. I'm sure that your colleagues will build on your success. And now I wish you all of us a beautiful, if solemn, farewell lecture, and you and your family, dear Professor Klasen, much strength in the future and only the very best. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, dear Stephan, on behalf of the Faculty for Business and Economics, it's my honor to welcome you to this special event celebrating the farewell lecture of Stephan Klasen. I have to admit at this point, I'm a little bit more nervous than usual about this. Speeches and welcome addresses are in general not my favorite part of this job of being the dean. And those who know me, you're also aware of the fact that I try to avoid spending much time wearing a suit and a tie. But for today's occasion, it's very much justified. Out of respect, esteem, and appreciation of Stephan's achievements and himself as a person. I think all of us can agree on this feeling today. It's important for us to be here because Stephan matters to us, and we want to show this not only to him, but also to his family and his friends. Stephan is certainly one of the most influential and active colleagues our faculty has, but he's certainly much more than this. He is indeed one of the finest, most impressive, yet modest and unpretentious personalities I ever had the pleasure to meet and work with. This does not only concern Stephan's work as a scientist, but it goes well beyond that, and it really concerns him being an ever-supporting, friendly, and upright character. It's with true sadness to see someone like him being held back from continuing his passionate life and work by a truly devastating disease. Stephan joined the University of Göttingen in 2003 and it is more than fair to say that since then he shaped the face of our faculty, and he's nowadays the by far most well-known colleague that we have among us. When Stephan arrived from an associate professorship at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität München, Göttingen was one of the few places where a chair in development economics was still existing. And in general, development economics was not among the most popular topics in economics at this time. But Stephan's work in Göttingen has made a really significant contribution to changing this. Hiring Stephan was unarguably one of the best decisions that a recruiting committee at this university has ever made. And this decision has since then significantly changed the appearance of our faculty in particular, but also of the whole university. I don't want to go into the details too much at this point, since I know we will hear more about this in Stephan's own lecture later, but I would nonetheless like to mention some developments that Stephan was involved in that were important for the Faculty of Business and Economics. One thing that was mentioned already, Stephan was responsible for establishing one of the first junior professorships at our university. And at this time, this was still something new, and it was a kind of unusual instrument still. But given Stephan's passionate support of young scientists and scholars at all stages of their careers, it's probably no surprise that he was in favor of such a strategic change that gave young researchers at an early stage of their career more independence, more freedom, and than you would have with the traditional postdoc positions at German universities. Stephan also served as the dean of our faculty, but stepped down from this position because he then had the chance to establish the Courant Center, the Courant Research Center, Poverty, Equity and Growth in Developing and Transition Countries. That was part of the successful application of Göttingen in the first round of the Excellence Initiative. This decision to step down from, or the decision to be the dean in the first place and then to step down, provides a clear indication of Stephan's willingness to serve the university on an administrative side, while at the same time also showing his research ambition. The design of the Courant Research Center focused around 3 junior researchers from development economics, agricultural economics, and statistics, and all of these 3 are now well-established colleagues at our university. The concept that the Courant Center took also indicates Stephan's ability to bring people together, people from different fields, and to work in an interdisciplinary environment that fosters scientific advances. At this point, I'd like to add a short personal side note. When the Courant Research Center was actually recruiting these junior professors, I was among the statisticians applying for this position. I just had completed my Ph.D. in a collaborative research center in Munich, and Stephan was also involved as a PI in this collaborative research center when he was still in Munich. And so I was pretty optimistic that I would have very good chances for this position. Maybe a little bit too optimistic. Things turned out differently, and the position was offered to Tatjana Grivobokova, she's also here today, which on the one hand left me pretty disappointed, but on the other hand, I have to admit that she was certainly the better choice for this position. Unfortunately, later I managed to move to Göttingen anyway, and in this period of the decision, applying for this other position, negotiations, Stephan was really considerably contributing to making this move a very attractive option and to finally come to Göttingen. Stephan is also responsible for turning Göttingen into Germany's most well-known and prestigious place for research in development economics. And this does not only reflect his own scientific excellence, but also his ability to attract other excellent scientists and to create a working environment that is stimulating, supportive, and enthusiastic. It's not surprising that his students call this the Göttinger Schule, the Göttingen School of Development Economics, to acknowledge how important it was for them to obtain parts of their education here in Göttingen from and with Stephan. While the points mentioned so far refer mostly to Stephan's achievements, and there are many really impressive achievements that could be mentioned in addition, I guess these are still not the most important points when it comes to acclaiming Stephan. What really makes him strike out of the crowd of economists in particular and researchers in general is his personality. Stephan is driven by curiosity and societal relevance rather than by ego, success in terms of A+ publications or other standard measures of scientific excellence. He's a brilliant mind, and his ability to comment on whatever topic in a research seminar would be discussed is legendary. Stephan is always arguing on purely scientific grounds. He's valuing the opinions of his discussants regardless of their age, gender, reputation, whatsoever. He's embracing research, teaching, and the support of young scientists in a way that makes him really unique. He's always friendly, caring, supportive. My former supervisor, Ludwig Fahrmeier from the University of Munich, who was leading the collaborative research center that Stephan was a part of at this time, expressed this as follows: Stephan is the best role model you could ever imagine for a professor, and I could not agree more with this assessment by Ludwig Fahrmeier. Thank you, Stephan, and thank you very much to all of you.
Now, mine is a little bit more of a personal account, and this has been an institutional account, so I just want to say, first of all, how I met Stephan Klasen, because I was not part of German universities. And I met Stephan during the World Bank conference called ABCDE, Annual Bank Conference on Development Economics of 2002. Sounds like Sudoku, something like that. In 2002, and I didn't know him. I read one key article of him, but I couldn't put the face and the article together. So he came to me and he said, well, are you still in Helsinki? And I said, no, now I'm in Florence. I'm no more frostbites, you know. So now the interesting thing is that that conference, which the World Bank organizes every 2 years, that year was focusing on poverty, inequality, and all that. But despite that, there were mass street demonstrations demanding the World Bank to do more on that, and demanding, in particular, the cancellation of the debt of low-income countries, as agreed in at the Monterey Conference of 2002, of this in March, something like that, in the same year. And I mean, the request on addressed to the international organization was do more on poverty, more on inequality, more on health, more on nutrition, more on gender, more on education, and so on. Now, by the way, this had been more or less agreed by the politicians in Monterey. But one thing is, you know, I worked for 25 years on and off for various UN agencies, not on and off, in a row, for various United Nations agencies. And there have been many conferences that actually they are very interesting. They end up with great declarations, and then 3 years later, nobody else knows what has happened. They are quickly forgotten. Now, so I think it was quite a coincidence, because Stephan must have had a big ear, you know, because he had heard strong and clear the message coming from the street, and he must have heard it years before, because for about 10 years, I don't know how many years, but anyhow, many years before, he had started working precisely on poverty, inequality, health, nutrition, and so on and so forth, and basically continued to do that for the subsequent 20, 25 years. And I think that it is interesting that this coincidence that I met him in a conference where the people were demanding this. He had already done that, and then we continued working more or less together despite the distance. And despite the fact that he moved from here to there to Munich, and when he was in Munich, I remember he was complaining that he didn't understand the German of the Bavarians, you know. Is it true? No? There's a Kreuzkrott, something like that, you know. So now I've been given the task to try to make some sense or to summarize Stephan's research. It's not an easy task because he's written so much, and I think I lost 3 kilos. Perhaps I should lose more, but he has done a lot of work. I mean, on my own count, which I'm sure is incomplete, he has done 268 pieces of work. And this is some of the summaries that he sent me. This means 163 things published in referee journals is a big number, you know. Then 9 books, 39 working papers, 557 chapters in books or other types of paper. Now, if you count all that, I mean, I'm in the Florentine Academia from the year 2000, and normally, and then I'm part of the European Academia and then or the International Academia. Normally, when you take part in a competition, you are expected to do 3, 4, 5, perhaps, pieces per year. To do 11, 12, this is outstanding. And I think that probably they should have given him not 1 appointment in Göttingen, but 2 salaries, because he produces so much that if there is a relation between productivity and remuneration, that is what should have happened. Now, all this is on top of all the other things he has done, which have been mentioned by 2 prior speakers. Institutional work, field work, and we'll come back to that, fundraising, teaching, mentoring, and contributing to international initiative, which we will also mention. Now, the question is, whereas this is a case in which we want to clone this man, you know. So where has he found inspiration, energy, drive to do all this? This is an important question. I asked him a few times, have you chosen development because of your members of your own family or your friends were working there? And they say, no. My guess, in simple quasi-religious terms, is that he is a chosen one. And it's not the only person with this characteristic which I met. For instance, the managing director of UNICEF, James P. Grant, that he died in 1995. He was the head of UNICEF for about 15 years. And the people doing a sort of historical research, they argue that he has saved something like 60 million lives, basically through immunization and very simple measures, and particularly in Africa. So this man was definitely blessed by God. And here we have another one. And who is so energetic, so farsighted, so intelligent, and so on and so forth, to do things which is basically benefiting not himself. Certainly his own university, but in the end, society as a whole, in Germany, and in particular outside of Germany. So it is important for us to know that we have been lucky to work with a gentleman with this type of characteristics. The only thing which created some suspicions when I looked into his CV, and I knew that, is that he had shown his interest for an open society and for international things. When he, I don't know, he must have been like 16, 17, he enrolled in this United World College in New Mexico. And now there are many colleges, many are like useless. This one is, I don't know whether it is good in terms of the academic curriculum, but they do try to impart an education which is to people from different nationalities, an education which leads to peace, understanding, mutual help. That, I think, is something perhaps. But I mean, there is an issue of causality. He went there because he was already on that way. Which area of research has he covered? Well, I would say that he has covered all the main areas, probably 5 to 7, which have been, and they continue to be, the most important problem unresolved in the current world. There's not, very often people in economics, they write papers which will quickly go into the dustbin of history. He has been writing about gender. I mean, in Italy, there is still this very large gender discrimination. You don't have to go to Africa, probably in Germany too. In Italy, we don't have equal pay. So if a man works and a woman works, they don't get the same salary. And then people, they say 15% differential, this may be doing, okay. Second, poverty. Now this is, with the SDGs, this has become a central issue. Poverty cum inequality. Thirdly, malnutrition. I've been very proud to be the chief economist of UNICEF because we reduce massively malnutrition, which seems to be like an unreachable target, with very simple measures. Then he has worked also on aid and trade, less, and I hope a little bit on environment and population. I mean, if you ask anyone in this room which are the main issues that need to be solved for the world to go ahead in a little bit more, these are the issues. Now, what are the proportions? I think that, Stephan, forgive me if my arithmetics is wrong, but I would say that something like, particularly in the early days, 30% of his work has focused on gender discrimination, which is still a major problem, not in Africa, not in India, in Germany, in Italy, in Europe. I think we haven't reached parity. Perhaps, well, in that he has been very heavily, I suspect, influenced by his maestro, his thesis supervisor, Professor Sen, and when I pronounce his name, I always have to cross myself, and who has discovered the 100 million women missing in South Asia not as an ethical problem, as a major development problem. So I would say that 30% of this work, of his work, has focused on that. I think that, and yet his initial thesis with Amartya was on something like this, basically misallocation of resources within the family, disfavoring women. Now, then after that, I think that he has done a lot of work, because many people, they are not sympathetic to welfare issues. We say, oh, it's so bad, so on and so forth. How fast did the manufacturing sector grow? So basically, he has shown that if you have high gender discrimination, the economy suffers, so that everybody will suffer. So it's not only an ethical problem, it's a major growth problem. Now, the second area, let's say poverty, malnutrition, poverty, inequality, malnutrition is a little bit more recent, and I think he has covers perhaps 40% of his work. And now, in doing that, he has done a lot of work on measurement, together with many of the young Turks, some of his own former students who are here, and whom I had the pleasure of meeting before and even now. And then also doing application, concrete application, not only theory, but concrete application to Bolivia, to in Africa, in several regions. And of course, if you do theoretical work, then you have to test it, because otherwise, if it doesn't work in a real context, then perhaps the theory is wrong. Now, I think that he has done that basically using microeconomics. So taking data for individuals or households. So now there is an abundance of surveys, and that is, I think that generally is the approach which is followed, including by the new Nobel Prize winners, the randomistas. But the Stephan is broader than that, to be quite honest. And with all due respect for my colleagues who has done that. He has also applied some of his own finding to macro and meso policies. And I have to confess my initial appreciation of his work, because he And everybody has been struggling to find out what are the best policies for growth and this and that and the other. And he wrote a paper which is called In Search of the Holy Grail, How to Achieve Proper Growth. So not only I study a small village in Botswana, and then I start, because the conclusions are not extendable. You know? So he has done that on theory and reviewing a large amount of literature. Now, why did I like this paper? These were the years, I mean, now it's less the case, but there have been years in which there has been quite an how shall I say, like a contrast between economies which were part, more or less, of the world let's say, from North American consensus, the neoliberal economists, saying that certain things, and then people, including myself, that will criticize that, you know. So Stephan's work has been absolutely useful because it was very balanced, you know. And in another joint work we did recently, together with many other people, he has one characteristic, is very, very balanced. It's not non-ideological. And that is a key quality in somebody who wants to do science and not ideology. Now, he has another quality. Another one is clarity, and the other one is conciseness. In the last piece of work we did together, we would do joint editing, and then I would edit something and then send it to him. And my piece was, let's say, 100 words. It would come back 60 words and much clearer. So he has the ability of saying things in fewer words, in a way just... Now, he has done also papers on aid and trade, and then for sake of time, I will, on which perhaps this occupies 10% of his time, and then on the environment, perhaps only one or a few papers, and then I hope he will do more work on population issues. And I just spoken with Michael Grimm, and I know that in Göttingen and with other universities, part of the Göttingen Schule, were part of the Göttingen Schule, there is work being done on that. Then in-depth country analysis, I mean, it's not good to do only research in Göttingen or in Florence. You have to work in countries and stay with the countries. And this is what he has done. Why is it preferable to work in a country? Because you work with the locals. And the locals have what one should call tacit knowledge. They know so many things about the country that even the best trained economists in the world and the most progressive, whatever you want, does not know. So, and then, of course, he did that because he spent, I think, 2 years in Witwatersrand, and where he created very good relation with the locals, but also in other countries. On what topics? Well, the one he has worked on, gender, inequality, poverty, deprivation, and so on and so forth. Now, I think that somebody else, I think that I think he has mentioned, his approach to research. There are people that they just lock the door of their own office, and they take a computer, they throw in all the data, and they do analysis, and perhaps there are beautiful analysis, very well done, and so on and so forth. That does not create a school of development. So Stephan's research can be characterized in 4 ways at least. One is that he worked both with microeconomic data and microeconomics and group data and macroeconomic data. It sounds like a sort of a pedantic distinction. It is not, because the conclusions you can draw are different, and there is no perfect world. In fact, the perfect world is when you are able to combine these 2 data sets, but it's difficult to do. And then he has always, or near always, tested econometrically to see whether the conclusion he arrived at, tested with the statistics and econometrics, whether it worked. Many people, they produce researchers that they, well, I don't know if they work or they don't work. I mean, but if they don't test them. Now, the second thing is, as we mentioned, is not an ivory tower research. I'm sure that he has worked a lot in Göttingen, wherever he was before, but he has done that in countries. So fact, if I look around here, and I talk to some of his former students from other countries, then, I mean, there are people from Chile, from India. And so one has to do a field with people from those countries and in country. And Stephan has spent a decent amount of time. In fact, I mean, we try to push our PhDs in Florence to spend at least, I don't know, 6 months out in the field. And say, now you just go and tell the guy, the little farmer, what is your research all about, and see whether he agrees, you know. And this is what he has done. Now, then Stephan's research, it is an immensely published long list of papers. If you look at it, is in, I would say, 90% of the cases or more, is published together with some other people, mostly younger people. And people that were doing their PhD, younger people. So he has stimulated interest in development economics in this way. And the younger ones, they also always want to write with those who are already well known. And they're also given all the dirty job to do. That is, I mean, at least this is what I do. And I don't know whether Stephan did that, you know, collecting data and checking this, checking that. So this is, I think, this is the way you create a school. You cannot just be good yourself and everybody else remains ignorant. No. Finally, I had to deal with the German development establishment like GTZ, GIDZ, and BMZ. So I keep telling them, do you know Professor Klasen? And they say, yeah, we know. And I think that, for instance, in Italy, I completely failed to penetrate the political system. And probably because I'm in Florence, not in Rome. But these people, and then you are not in Bonn or in Berlin, where the government now sits. And so they even told me, in one specific case, Klasen was able to convince the government not to look only at poverty, but also at inequality. Bravo, Klasen, they say. Okay. Well, I mean, it's long forgone. Now, international organization. We have worked quite a lot together in several of these. Well, first of all, and he didn't mention it, but the EU, the European Union, produced with the new fashion on the new interest in inequality, produced the EU inequality report in 2012, I think. And the coordination was based at the European University Institute in Florence. And Stephan was part of that, and I was part of that. And I think that even there, I mean, it's, also in this particular case, it played quite an important thing. Now, the EU being a political organization, in the end, I mean, there were countries that you can imagine which one, that they tried to soften the tone, but Stephan and myself, we tried to basically, so even it's quite, sometimes it's quite annoying, quite boring to sit and to convince somebody that we have to be a little bit bolder in that respect. Then he was, we were both members of the International Panel on Social Progress. This is an initiative which is born out of Princeton, Marc Fleurbe, and who basically, and La Sorbonne, who basically have realized that society as it is, not only in economics, in many other areas, is unfit to deal with the problems of the 21st century. And so they created a huge panel, I don't know how many people, a large number of people, and Stephan, other people, including myself, were responsible for one chapter on inequality and social progress. Then he has been appointed, as mentioned already, a member of the International Panel on Climate Change, which after seeing what has happened in Venice 3 days ago, I think is quite important. And then he's been member of the United Nations Committee on Development and Development Policies. And I think that even when he started having some health problem, he would show an extreme generosity in saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I mean, taking the initiative. And this is, must be the gasoline they sell in Germany has more octanes than in most other countries. Finally, he has been a member for many years of the European Development Network. which is a sort of a club of the something like 60, 70 development economists from all Europe. And this, you have to be elected, you cannot join it. And so it's quite nice to go to this meeting in which you exchange your research, and then and the other people do the same. And in 2015, he was elected president of that. Yeah. Now, I think that I will conclude just with a few considerations. Now, knowing this man quite well for many years, I thought, well, would have his research had the same impact if Stephan Klasen was a different character, was a sort of a more quiet guy? And my answer was, my impression is no. So that his theorems, his ideas, his capacity of bringing together many students and colleagues and Italians and Germans and Turks and whatever, and basically would not have been as successful if he didn't have the fire, charisma, drive, and commitment to the well-being of the poor that characterize his persona. Many people are smart, they can become good economists. But few, like Stephan, combine intelligent, good training, intuition, with commitment and drive. And I think that the latter part, which is not measurable in number of papers, so it is actually, but you don't measure it with IQ and the EQ, and this has been an exception. So I think that I have no shame, no sense of shame in saying that we admire him. I admire him. I admire his work and strength and the commitment to the cause of the poor. His generosity with students and younger colleagues. His intuition about new things to study. And his indomitable will. Even when his energies started to be sapped by the disease, he didn't slow down. This is seldom the case. So I think that I would conclude by saying that I am happy, and I think that all those who had the opportunity of working with him during the last 20, 30 years should be happy to have worked with him. And we look forward to work with you many more years. Thank you.
Dear Stephan, dear family, friends, and colleagues of Stephan. When Stephan asked me a while ago to talk about his work, I immediately knew what I wanted to talk about. It was not about his tremendous contribution to the study of poverty and inequality, even though few development economists match your ideas, your analysis, and your writing. What I want to talk about is about your leadership in educating future scientists, as there really is no other person that has mentored so many PhDs with so much dedication and so much success. The focus is nowadays often on own publications, and Stephan has many of them, 200 or more, I don't know, in total. But the importance of leadership in mentoring young scientists is often neglected, and it's also a bit difficult to quantify, except on this picture. This is the Göttingen Schule with 75 or more PhD, and you have become a multiplier of development economics research by educating all of us. So this number speaks for itself, and we can all read the explicit knowledge you have created in the papers you have written. But there's even more tacit knowledge that you have passed on to your PhDs and that we are trying to pass on wherever we live now. So the focus of my talk today is what it means to be part of the Göttinger Schule. And since this is about learning, I thought to structure it in 7 lessons. And of course, there are more, but many people want to talk, so 7 lessons, some serious ones, and also some not so serious ones that I've learned from you. And the reason to also put some non-serious ones is because whatever discussion you had with Stephan on poverty and inequality and how serious the topic was, there was always a pinch of humor you added to the discussion, and I want to have that in this presentation as well. So of course this will be a totally subjective presentation. It's not scientific and there won't be many statistics, so sorry for that, Stephan. But I think that makes you such a wonderful mentor because you had a very individualistic approach to your students and you treated everybody differently and you tried to build on whatever our strength was. So each of us would probably tell a bit of a different story standing here, but I still hope that I touched on some lessons we would all agree on we have learned from Stephan. So I went through my time as a Ph.D. and I realized that I did my Ph.D. Just guess, but still. So I did my PhD before smartphones, so that makes to seem a long time ago. But I have this one picture when Amartya Sen visited us to give a seminar. And I love this picture because it nicely shows what makes you such a special economist. You always find an interesting fact in every single presentation and paper. And you can see this here, so I puzzled, but that's normal. But even Amartya Sen, tried to follow. And but you found something interesting in this presentation. And we always got 100% of your attention whenever giving a talk. And then there were all your many questions after the talk. But not only did you ask many questions, it was always the question you then realized, well, that was the question I should have asked myself before even going up there. So young researchers are actually often shocked when they return from their first conference in economics and report that most economists are just about on a hunt on mistakes. But this was never the case for you, Stephan. You always try to understand what the scientist is interested in and wants to achieve, and you try to help us with that. And you would rarely point out an obvious mistakes or would fall in love with endogeneity or lack of clustered standard errors, which some other people point at many times. And we all know what an incredibly fast thinker and knowledgeable person you are, but you never showed up in any of the presentation of even very young scientists. Stephan truly tries to advance science by asking the right question to others. And often, and that you see here, he would give a summary of the most important questions you should address after the talk. So thanks for Laura, who kept one of those and sharing that with us. And then you could just go home and work on that point. Lesson 2, be an inspirational teacher. I also learned from Stephan that teaching master students is as important as research, and here we are again back to the multiplier. I know of many master students that started to do a PhD in development economics just because of Stephan, and some people even changed subjects. Sebastian Former is one of them. And as you also can see, at least in my time in Göttingen, you did not spend too much time on fancy PowerPoint presentations. But like every lecture started with a very interesting fact and an interesting question, and that inspired many, many students. And I think only you can have a successful lecture with that slide if I do that. And one of these master students is Samuel, who did a master with you. And he actually just defended his PhD 2 months ago at ETH with me on measurement and impact of horizontal inequalities. And when I opened the PhD thesis and I read the first sentences, first I thank Professor Stephan Klasen at the University of Göttingen. And during my master's studies, Professor Klasen inspired me to do further research and constantly gave me helpful advice during my PhD. Professor Klasen has a heart of gold. And I had to smile, we just can't compete with you. Lesson 3, support diversity because different people have different goals and needs, not despite they're different. I'm sorry, no, sorry for that. So we all know how much you have done to move forward the research on gender inequality. I'm terribly sorry, okay. So we all know how much you have contributed to the research of gender inequality. But what is as important is what you have done to contribute to increase the share of women in economics. Even though still today, if you look at economics is a bit of a dismal science if you look at the share of women. But not in Stephan groups, you always had about 50% of women. It's also often said that there are so few women in economics because it's such a hostile environment. Also not in your group. Working with you as a PhD was challenging and also sometimes scaring because even if you had spent weeks on thinking about a problem, you then would go to Stephan's office and experience the moment where he just said, well, you have to do this, and this kind of embarrassing moment. But most of all, it was very interesting and a lot of joy working in this group. And I really think the reason why you invite such a diverse set of researchers, different gender, different nationalities, different cultures, different disciplines, different ages, is because you think innovation needs different perspective. I always had to feel it is because you appreciate this diversity. Lesson 4. Don't take yourself too serious, and we heard this before, you're such a modest person, and teaching us that science is teamwork. And when you got outside offers from the Göttingen University, you did not negotiate to increase your group or your salary, you negotiated to get more development economics to Göttingen. So you used your opportunity to create new opportunities for others. And linked to this thinking about science as teamwork is you are really a role model of not taking yourself personally too serious. And that's why I want to share, and that's just because you always want to know the limitation of any piece of work. And that's the only time I remember that your PhDs were not so happy with what you did. Is you thought it's a good idea to distribute chocolate Santa Clauses during a Christmas dinner, with larger Santa Clauses going to the PhD who made a bigger individual contribution that year. And it was meant to be fun, and a lesson, don't take yourself too serious, but it was not taken too well. On a more serious note, what really showed, that your thinking about science is teamwork was a big success was the article from the Handelsblatt ranking 2017, where they noted that the small faculty of Göttingen made it up to the top of the Handelsblatt ranking, even though I'm not personally a fan of it, but here it works well. That this was achieved through cooperation. And when you were interviewed about how Göttingen did so well in economics in this ranking, you appreciated the work of the PhDs, which I think is remarkable. And you said, it's because of cooperation and not because of big stars that we attract. Lesson 5. you co-authors and colleagues are your friends because you're such a fine person. And I think your interest in other people and not only what they write is also reflected here with so many people coming from close and far to join this important lecture of you. And when I asked another former PhD student of you, Francesca, if she's coming today, she said, how could I not come? And I think that sums it up very beautifully, all our relationship with you. And there are many, many stories of PhD and how you have supported them beyond research design and writing, supporting them to advance in their career, even after their PhDs, and you have personally helped me a lot. But more importantly, also supporting them with private challenges, from suffering through the World Championship 2006 to special support when a partnership broke up. And the quote on this slide was the first sentence in my PhD in 2007, and I still feel that way today, that you did not only organize knowledge for us, but that you also organized the lives of your PhD. And I just want to share one very personal story where you shaped my life beyond science. In 2013, and probably you don't remember, you asked me, how old are you by the fact? And I'm not telling you the answer now. But then with Stephan's honesty and scientific background, which is sometimes a bit difficult to endure for others, he said, well, then you're not too old to have children. and you should not miss out on that. And sometimes you need an extra hint, and my son is 5 years now. Lesson 6. Say yes more often. Probably one of the most often advice I've gotten when I moved from a postdoc to an assistant professorship position was learn how to say no. In contrast, what we learn from you, looking at you and observing how you work, is say yes more often. Stephan rarely says no to a request and tries to support all his colleagues with any idea they might have. And having lectured at the Kinder University is just one other example where you have taken a challenge that was not directly linked to your research. And talking about poverty when others are talking about dinosaurs and explosion to kids is a big challenge. Or the other challenge you took. So last year, when it was already so difficult for you to travel, you came to Zurich to the Development Economics Conference of the Verein für Sozialpolitik to discuss with us. And I think the reason behind this say yes more often is that you live that being a scientist is also a privilege, and therefore comes a duty for all of us to do as much as we can. And as PhDs, we always wondered, and I think Andrea also wondered that, how you managed to do so many things at the same time. And the only secret we discovered was that you save time when writing emails. So often you just got a sentence with best SK, and sometimes just the S. And you always were eating soup for lunch, or Eintopf. And so by the time I was only halfway through my menu, you were finished with the food and had already made plans for the next research project. So that's where we can learn. And that's the most important lesson I think we have all learned from Stephan is make a difference for society. Economics sciences is a social science, and with that comes our duty to make a difference for society. And Stephan is deeply concerned about global inequalities, and what he has shown to his PhD is that writing about it is not enough. It's necessary, but it's not enough. And together with your colleagues, you have founded PECNet, for example, that tries to link researchers and policymakers and have initiated prizes for research that's relevant for policy. And you have advised many, many organizations. You got engaged and you inspired your PhDs to do the same, already during the PhD. And what comes with that is, when you do a research project with Stephan always starts with an interesting question or fact, and not with a publication. Das ist doch interessant, is a phrase I heard many times from you, and never did I start a project with you where we started with a publication strategy before we were even thinking about what's the important question. And don't get me wrong, writing and good writing is really important to Stephan, but a publication is the end of a process and not the beginning. And I think that's something you have really taught all of us. And here I come to the end of my talk, and again back to the beginning of my PhD. I was lucky that you accepted me as your PhD. Before, I was also rejected by many other PhD programs because of a lack of a mainstream economics background, I guess. But I was even more lucky to then do this PhD with you, because the major reason I wanted to do this PhD, to learn more how to fight poverty and to do it a bit better than what I've seen working with NGOs and also the UN before joining your group. And when you accepted me, well, you saw that there are some gaps in my economic knowledge, and then you sent me a list of 5 to 10 books that I should read before I started in Göttingen. And then when I started to read, I understood that that's not going to be an easy task, but that it's also probably going to be the most interesting journey and the biggest learning of my life, which it was. So this is just a summary again, and there are many more lessons, but I stop here. And to stop, I want to thank you again for guiding and inspiring all of us, for being our role model in science and in life, and it's a joy working with you. And thanks for bringing us all together today and touching our lives, Stephan. We'll try everything to pass on your knowledge and values to other PhDs, even though I already know that we can never do this. But to grow the Göttingen Schule even more, and to make sure that diversity in economic sciences grow, the University of Göttingen has a special gift to you that will now be presented by Sebastian.
Dear Stephan, a farewell lecture is a time to say thank you. On behalf of the Göttinger Schule, I would like to say thank you to you, not with words, like the example you have given as a scientist, as an advisor, as a human being, that you continue to give, that has moved like many of us beyond words. And we thought, okay, what's like a good way to say thank you to you? And different ideas came up. A few weeks ago, I guess, you circulated the announcement of like an Amartya Sen Prize. So that was like an idea that was discussed. But in the end, we thought about something else, which is to continue something that's very important to you, which is like the promotion and like the development of young minds, of young scientists, what Isabel just explained. And therefore, conditional on you allowing us to do that, the university has established a Stephan Klasen postdoctoral fellowship. And this fellowship is open to young scientists from low and middle income countries, the Faculty of Business and Economics, the presidential boards, and the other development economists, Andreas, Christina, Marcella, Holger, and me. We ensured that there's sufficient funding for the next 5 years to invite 2 postdocs every year for a full year to experience the Göttinger Schule, and we are very committed to make this continue forever. Thank you.
Dear Stephan Klasen, dear friends, relatives, and colleagues of Stephan Klasen, a question that has kept us awake at night for many, many years is, like potentially many others of you as well, is how exposure to Stephan Klasen shapes a person's perspective on life and the world and attitudes in general. And so on one cold October day, 10 rather underworked scholars, you see them listed here and most of them standing behind me, came together to tackle this question. And the idea quickly emerged to develop the multidimensional Stephan Klasen Exposure Index. And a survey, an online survey, was sent out to all invitees to this farewell lecture, and so many of you in this room certainly, I hope so, responded to the survey. Certainly is selected, but notwithstanding also a very interesting sample of Stephan Klasen's acquaintances. The survey covered questions on global, social, and of course also research perspectives and several welfare indicators. Indeed, 160 people responded to the survey, an outstanding response rate of nearly 50%. And they disclosed their zodiac signs, their marriage status, their toothbrushing behavior, as well as how they signed emails and how much of their desk was still visible. A theoretical model was quickly developed. Its predictions were tested, and within a couple of weeks, a groundbreaking article was written, and excerpts of which Manuel and Sarah will now present, and now we basically bring in the statistics that were missing in the previous lecture.
So in order to estimate how we measure exposure to Stephan Klasen, we generate something called the multidimensional Stephan Klasen Exposure Index. And this is based on the Alcar and Foster methodology. So we have 3 dimensions and 14 indicators in these dimensions. Let me just scroll down. Yeah. So the 3 dimensions would include professional interactions, which have indicators like when you first met Stephan. We think 2016 is a good year, because that's the year when Trump and Brexit happened. And then we have social interactions, which have how many beers and how many cigarettes you've shared with Stephan. And then we have some trivia questions, for instance, Stephan's kids' names, and also how many students can you name in 10 seconds. We give a cutoff of 5 for that. So based on these indicators, we construct an exposure measure or exposure where the score is a weighted index of number of exposure measures you have in there. So we decide that a cutoff of 40% is good here. So if your score is above 40%, you're considered SK exposed. Under that, you are not SK exposed. So if you look at the density plot, it's a very nice bell shape here, and we have about 56% of the sample which has exposure index of more than 40%, so 56% are SK exposed in this case. Right, so now I'll move on to Manuel, who has the results of our estimation here.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. So I'm only going to show you a very small slice of the results. But we're going to have the full paper available during the reception, so go and take a look. Also to the appendix, of course. So what we find is very interesting. First, we find that being exposed to Stephan Klasen, that's the top variable, reduces your dislike for macroeconomists. and also reduces your dislike for wearing white socks and sandals. So when we combine, it's real statistics, okay? When we combine these measures into what we call a social tolerance index, so we combine several of these indicators, we find in column 4 that being exposed to Stephan Klasen makes you more tolerant on average. And note that we have a very rigorous specification because we control for variables that are usually omitted in most studies, like whether you're a dog person or whether you are left-handed, okay? Maybe you also find interesting, given Isabel's presentation, that we find no effect of being exposed to Stephan Klasen on a preference of chocolate Santa Clauses over issues of the Review of Income and Wealth as a Christmas gift. Okay? So that's. And the final result I want to share with you is we also ask people what they consider to be the world's most pressing problem. And here in column 5, we find that people exposed to Stephan Klasen are more likely to report poverty, inequality, or climate change as being the world's most pressing issue. On the other hand, they are less likely to consider more local problems, but that we feel are still very important, like Deutsche Bahn delays or Mensa being crowded. Okay? So, we can only conclude that exposure to SK is highly beneficial, both from an individual and societal perspective. We see, you can see all the indicators that are significantly affected by this exposure. But our paper goes beyond that, so we also collected very interesting data on all of you. And with that, we can do some more policy recommendations, which are not obvious. So first, for example, just to give you 2 examples, we think the government should closely regulate Tinder, because among the Tinder users in our sample, we found this very disturbing support for white socks and sandals. Okay? And second, everyone should see Wonder Woman, which is allegedly one of Stephan's favorite movies, as there are large positive externalities of watching this movie. For example, people who watch Wonder Woman rate their perceived wealth much higher than people who did not watch it. So we want to thank all of you, and also here, everyone who answered the survey and sent a picture, silly, hopefully, while doing so. Thank you very much.
Outside of the university setting, I can confirm that exposure to Stephan Klasen is highly beneficial, even though our exposure has been more around music, wine, and cheese, because we are the neighbors and friends, and we're extremely honored that we are allowed to play 3 songs today. I guess you all wondered why there's a young lady and this middle-aged man singing songs. We're friends of Stephan's. We've enjoyed a lot of live music and house concerts together. Always had a lot of fun, and we're honored that we can play here today. So we're going to play you 2 more songs. Hope you enjoy them. up our glass. Good moments now, and then hard times may pass. I blew up, I messed up, I stepped out of line. It's not the first time, so come on, apologize, it'll be fine. Long nights and long days, that we're at the seas, nightmares and dreams, the end's not important, it's life's enemy. Let's have one for good times, and one for today, one for old friends far away. Let's pour us another and raise up our glass. Good moments now, let hard times may pass. All the family and kids are alright. Safe and sound, they will sleep through the night. And I just want to hold you, wish that I told you you are my life. So get up and go out, be with your friends, know all your sins, still take you in, and we won't give a damn. Just let your hair down, lower your guard, open your heart, step up to the bar, and take life in your arms. Tell one for good times, and one for today, one for old friends far away. Let's pour us another, and raise up our glass. Good moments now, when hard times may pass. Let's have one for good times, and one for today, one for old friends far away. Let's pour us another, and raise up our glass. Good moments now, and then hard times may pass. Good moments now, and then hard times may pass.
Thank you very much for coming. Now we're fed to read the lesson.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. The five of us have the honor of reading Stephan's lecture to you. Albert Wenger and Lucas Barr and I were friends of Stephan's for 30 years now, having begun as college roommates. And Luke and I now have the privilege of being godfathers to Lucas and Nicholas Klasen, who are continuing their family tradition of engaging powerful souls and minds in the business of improving the world. So with no further ado, we begin to read Stephan's lecture. I want to preface my talk with a quote from Stephen Hawking, who died last year from ALS. In 2010, he gave this advice to his children. 1, remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. 2, never give up work. 3, if you are lucky enough to find love, remember it is there and don't throw it away. Inspired by these words, my talk today will be mostly autobiographical, augmented by 4 digressions that relate to my experiences in the developing world, in the academic world of development economics, and the world of policy and politics. Thus, I am not going to talk about my research. If you are interested in my research, I have recently produced 6 overview articles on some of the research areas I have worked on, particularly gender issues, poverty measurement, and climate change. They are shown on the slide. I had an early interest in development issues in what was then referred to as the Third World. My father can partly be blamed for this, as he, as a politics teacher, was deeply concerned about development questions. This interest also goes back to my church youth group, which organized yearly fundraisers for development projects. My life took a drastic turn when, in 1983, I was selected to spend the last 2 years of high school at the Arm & Hammer United World College in Montezuma, New Mexico, USA. 200 students from 70 countries lived and studied together, engaged in outdoor and social service activities, and prepared for the International Baccalaureate. The school included students from the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, Israelis and Palestinians, Black and white South Africans, many students from developing countries, as well as Europeans and Americans. Apart from the Cold War, questions of global inequality and economic development were a frequent topic of discussion. And with students from developing countries participating, these discussions were more urgent and at the same time more personal. Attending the United World College also opened up the opportunity to apply to US universities. I applied and was accepted at Harvard College, where I enrolled in 1987 after first completing my social service in Germany, working with severely disabled people. I completed my BA in 1990 and stayed on to do a PhD in economics. The academic environment was fantastic. My teachers in microeconomics were Mas-Kalel, Winston, and Green, who used the course to develop their textbook. Game theory and mechanism design were taught by Maskin and Schelling. Sachs, Barrow, and Mankiw taught us macroeconomics. And Sen, Timmer, and Perkins taught the development courses I took. In line with my interests, I focused on development issues. Based on fieldwork in Bolivia, my BA thesis developed a computable general equilibrium model of a Bolivian village. Those of you who are here for the conference celebrating my 50th birthday may remember Amartya Sen's comments on the thesis, emphasizing that, for my PhD, I needed to be rescued from CGE modeling. Indeed, under his supervision, I left CGE modeling to focus on gender bias in mortality in developing countries, the so-called missing women problem. The thesis also included work on gender bias in mortality in Germany during the 18th and 19th centuries. Apart from working towards my PhD, I was Sen's research assistant, which gave me unique access to him and his global academic network. In addition, Harvard offered a wealth of political and social activities. Most important for me was that I worked for 4 years in a homeless shelter run every winter by Harvard students in the basement of a church. For 2 years, I was the director of the shelter. Although frustrating and difficult at times, it was, in many ways, among the most rewarding experiences of my life. After completing my PhD, I joined the World Bank's Young Professionals program. Most of the time I spent working at the bank's resident mission in Johannesburg, South Africa. There, we advised the new government, under Nelson Mandela, on poverty issues, health sector reform, and the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, LHPW, a scheme that transfers water from the Lesotho Highlands to South Africa's industrial heartland.
This leads me to my first digression on the role of national and international NGOs in large infrastructure projects in developing countries, using the Lesotho Highlands Water Project as a case study. The LHWP to date involves 2 large dams in the mountains of Lesotho, transfer tunnels to South Africa, a hydropower station, and associated infrastructure. South Africa pays for the water transfer project and pays royalties for the water, currently 3% of Lesotho's GDP, The power station, paid for by Lesotho, generates 70% of Lesotho's electricity needs, carbon-free. As is typically the case with such projects, the greatest challenge is to ensure that social and environmental issues are adequately addressed. The most important social issue concerned resettlement and compensation of affected populations, which was also the focus of the World Bank's work on the project. Despite the size of the dams and the reservoirs, fortunately only a few hundred people needed to be resettled, and a few thousand households compensated for the loss of land. This made the problem more manageable, and overall resettlement and compensation went reasonably well. National and international NGOs spent an active role lobbying the World Bank on this project, but with different intentions. The most important actor at the national level was the Lesotho Council of NGOs, LCN. They would put pressure on the World Bank to achieve improvements for the affected population, knowing that the World Bank cannot afford to be seen as ignoring negative impacts on locals. The most active international NGO was the International Rivers Network, IRN, based in the USA. They are opposed to large dams in principle, and therefore were putting pressure on the World Bank to stop the project. They did so by accusing the World Bank of failing to meet acceptable social and environmental standards. Things came to a head in 1998 when the World Bank needed to decide about its participation in the next phase of the project. This decision was taken at the headquarters in Washington, which gave IRN a structural advantage over LCN. Not only were they based in the US, but more importantly, they had a much greater experience of lobbying in Washington. As a result, it was quite uncertain whether the World Bank would stay in the project. Things changed when LCN took the unusual step to write the World Bank emphasizing that IRN was not speaking on its behalf and that they favored in principle the involvement of the World Bank. This helped tip the balance and the World Bank stayed in the project, which, in my view, as well as the view of LCN, helped to maintain higher social and environmental standards during implementation. Currently, the next phase of the project is being implemented without World Bank participation. For South Africa, the World Bank increased the costs of the project too much by insisting on high social and environmental standards, and its involvement also generated unwelcome international attention to this potentially controversial project. Indeed, since the World Bank is no longer involved, IRN has drastically scaled back its activities. Whether the absence of the World Bank and associated international scrutiny is good for people affected by the project in Lesotho is doubtful. Although I greatly enjoyed my time at the World Bank, I left in 1996 to return to academia. My partner, now wife, who had joined me in South Africa and worked in a hospital in Soweto, and I were not keen to go to Washington where my next World Bank posting would have been. I also wanted more space to think more deeply about development issues than was possible in a job in operations. After 2 years as a postdoc in Cambridge, England, I was hired as a professor on a temporary position in Munich. I was quite lucky, since then it was quite still unusual to hire people from outside the German academic system. The dean of the faculty at the time was John Komlos, an American economic historian who was willing to give me this opportunity. Academically, Munich was great. I had great colleagues, and there were many international visitors, and I was able to concentrate on development issues. At the same time, it was clear that development economics was not a priority of the faculty. Also, now that I had small children, I experienced Munich as a very expensive and exhausting place.
Als ich dann 2002 den Ruf auf eine Zivil-Professur in Göttingen erhielt, habe ich ihn angenommen und bin 2003 gewechselt. Dass ich den Ruf bekam, verdanke ich vor allem dem Nachtzugangebot der Deutschen Bahn. Der Termin des Berufungsvortrages fiel in einen seit langem geplanten Familienurlaub in Österreich. Beides ließ sich nicht verschieben und ich war kurz davor, in Göttingen abzusagen. Dann stellte sich heraus, dass es eine direkte Nachtzugverbindung von dem Dorf in Kärnten nach Göttingen gab. So konnte ich den Termin wahrnehmen und meinen Urlaub nur um 24 Stunden unterbrechen. Diese Zugverbindung wurde vor ein paar Jahren eingestellt. Die Professur in Göttingen war eine der wenigen in Deutschland verbliebenen Lehrstühle für Entwicklungsökonomie. Zusammen mit dem Ibero-Amerika-Institut und Kooperationsmöglichkeiten mit den Agrarökonomen bot sie viel Entwicklungspotenzial. Auch ist Göttingen eine familienfreundliche Stadt, sodass ich gerne zugesagt habe.
This leads me to my second digression on the decline and resurgence of development economics in Germany. Development economics in Germany in the early 2000s was in a bad state. Many professorships had been eliminated as part of budget cuts, including in Göttingen, where a C3 professorship had been cut. The few remaining professors were often focused on German development cooperation and were poorly integrated in the international scientific community. Accordingly, many published in German and few targeted international journals, thereby reducing the international visibility of their work. At the same time, development economics had been experiencing a renaissance in the Anglo-American academic scene since the 1990s. New growth theory and growth empirics put questions of long-term development back on the research agenda. New data from household surveys, aid, and geospatial data allowed detailed analysis of poverty, inequality, and aid effectiveness. The behavior of people in developing countries became the subject of new behavioral economics, using lab-in-the-field methods. Lastly, randomized controlled trials became the dominant method of impact evaluations of development policies. Since 1998, 7 Nobel Prizes were awarded to people working on these topics, including the winners of this year's award. These new exciting developments for research and policy analysis provided the opportunity for a resurgence of development economics in Germany. And I'm pleased to note that I was among a group of younger development economists that was able to support this resurgence. A first condition for resurgence was that there were enough development researchers with strong international publication records and research agendas that made them competitive with candidates not only for the few remaining professorships in development economics, but also for professorships in macroeconomics, finance, empirical economics, international economics, economic policy, and political economy. In the early 2000s, such researchers were starting to emerge. A second important element was to establish or join national and international networks in development economics. So some of us joined the development section of the German Economic Association. In 2004, Lukas Menkhoff became the head of this section and added to the closed meeting of the section's members an international conference on development economics with a competitive call for papers and well-known keynote speakers. This format has been maintained to this day and has attracted a steady stream of promising young development economists to the section, providing a vibrant research and networking community. The conference has also sharply increased the international visibility of development economics in Germany and beyond. In addition, we created the Poverty, Equity, and Growth Network, PEGNET, which brings together development researchers and practitioners. And an increasing number of German development researchers were elected to join the European Development Research Network, EUDN, the leading network of development economists in Europe. A third element has been to create a critical mass of development researchers at individual universities to achieve higher international visibility and the scope for collaboration. I think that most here would agree that Göttingen has been at the forefront of this development. But now there are several universities in Germany and Switzerland with substantial development research groups. Many of the people who made this resurgence of development research possible are sitting in the audience today.
Als ich dann 2003 meine Stelle in Göttingen antrat, war mir der Ausbau der Entwicklungsökonomie also ein zentrales Anliegen. Dabei wurde ich von 3 Prinzipien geleitet. Erstens, ein nachhaltiger Ausbau kann nur über zusätzliche Ressourcen für das Department erreicht werden. Zweitens, mehr professorale KollegInnen sind für den Ausbau wichtiger als mehr Mitarbeiterstellen. Drittens, durch Vernetzung innerhalb der Universität kann man die kritische Masse an ForscherInnen schneller und dauerhafter erhöhen und neue Kooperationen anstoßen. Der Ausbau erfolgt im Wesentlichen in 5 Schritten. Zuerst wandelte ich eine Mitarbeiterstelle in eine Juniorprofessur um, die nacheinander von Michael Grimm, Carola Grün, Sebastian Vollmer und Andreas Landmann besetzt wurden. 3 der 4 haben mittlerweile Vollprofessuren in Deutschland. In einem zweiten Schritt nutzte ich 2 Rückverhandlungen nach Rufen aus dem Ausland, um eine neue Professur in Entwicklungsökonomie zu schaffen. Dabei gab ich jeweils Mitarbeiterstellen auf, um einen Beitrag zur Finanzierung zu leisten. So konnte zunächst eine W2-Professur, Axel Dreher, jetzt an der Uni Heidelberg, und später daraus eine W3-Professur, Holger Struhlig, geschaffen werden. Die Exzellenzinitiative bot die dritte Gelegenheit, den Ausbau weiter voranzutreiben. Gemeinsam mit Kollegen aus der Agrarökonomie und Stochastik konnten wir uns in einem inneruniversitären Wettbewerb mit dem Courant Center, Research Center Poverty, Equity and Growth in Developing and Transition Countries durchsetzen. Dadurch konnten 3 W2 Tenure-Track-Professuren geschaffen werden, eine in Entwicklungsökonomie, Marcelle Ibanez, eine agrarökonomische Professur mit Entwicklungsländerbezug, Shao Yu, und eine methodische Professur, Tatjana Kribokova. Der 4. Schritt war die Schaffung von 2 gemeinsamen Juniorprofessuren mit dem GIGA-Institut in Hamburg, Jan Ley, Renate Hartwig, die weitgehend vom GIGA finanziert wurden. Als schließlich das Center for Modern Indian Studies gegründet werden sollte, haben Steve Vertocek vom Max-Planck-Institut zur Erforschung multireligiöser und multiethnischer Gesellschaften und ich ein Konzept für eine gesellschaftswissenschaftliche Ausrichtung des Centers entwickelt. Teil des Konzepts war eine Professur für Entwicklungsökonomie Südasiens, die jetzt mit Sebastian Vollmer besetzt ist. So ist die Gruppe der Entwicklungsökonomen allein im VWL-Department von einer Professur auf 4 Professuren, 2 außerplanmäßige Professuren und 2 Juniorprofessuren angewachsen. Um die kritische Masse an Forschern weiter zu erhöhen und weitere Kooperationsmöglichkeiten zu erschließen, war eine Vernetzung mit Forschern in Göttingen und darüber hinaus unabdingbar. In Göttingen kam zu einer besonders fruchtbaren Zusammenarbeit mit den Agrarökonomen, die zumeist an sehr ähnlichen Forschungsfragen wie wir arbeiten und ein Großteil der Forschung sich ebenfalls mit Entwicklungsländern befasst. Bei der Einwerbung des Courant-Zentrums haben wir zum ersten Mal unsere Kräfte gebündelt. Darauf aufbauend wurde das Graduiertenkolleg Global Food vom agrarökonomischen Kollegen Martin Queim ins Leben gerufen, das unsere Zusammenarbeit in den letzten 9 Jahren geprägt hat. Darüber hinaus arbeiten wir eng mit den Agrarökonomen im Sonderforschungsbereich zu Indonesien und einer Forschungsgruppe zu Indien zusammen. An diesen Projekten sind auch Naturwissenschaftler und Statistiker beteiligt, mit denen wir gemeinsam ökonomische und ökologische Ursachen und Auswirkungen von Landnutzungsänderungen untersuchen. Schließlich haben wir gemeinsam mit den Agrarökonomen einen englischsprachigen Masterstudiengang Development Economics ins Leben gerufen, der sich großer Beliebtheit erfreut. Ein gemeinsamer Antrag für einen Sonderforschungsbereich zum Thema Armut. Leider waren nicht alle Kooperationsprojekte erfolgreich. Ein gemeinsamer Antrag für einen Sonderforschungsbereich zum Thema Armut wurde ebenso wenig gefördert wie ein geplanter Exzellenzcluster zum Thema nachhaltige Landnutzung. Aber neue Initiativen sind geplant und ich bin sicher, dass die enge Zusammenarbeit weitergehen wird. Über Göttingen hinaus haben wir vor allen Dingen mit den Agrar- und Entwicklungsökonomen der Uni Hannover zusammengearbeitet. Gemeinsam haben wir eine Forschungsgruppe und darauf aufbauend ein Langfristvorhaben zur Armut und ländlicher Entwicklung in Thailand und Vietnam gestartet. Mit Hannover zusammen haben wir auch 2011 unser Graduiertenkolleg Globalization and Development eingeworben, das unsere Doktorandenausbildung seitdem prägt. Durch den Ausbau der Entwicklungsökonomie und diesen vielfältigen Kooperationen ist Göttingen der deutschlandweit größte und international sichtbarste Standort für Entwicklungsländerforschung.
Obschon mein Hauptaugenmerk auf dem Ausbau der Entwicklungsökonomie war mir ein florierendes VWL-Department ein wichtiges Anliegen. Zumal meine KollegInnen im Department den Aufwuchs der Entwicklungsökonomie mit Wohlwollen begleitet haben. Dies ist nicht unbedingt selbstverständlich und ich habe mich daher an gemeinsamen Veranstaltungen und Initiativen des Departments so weit wie möglich beteiligt. Darüber hinaus habe ich Aktivitäten initiiert, um die Sichtbarkeit des Departments zu erhöhen. Insbesondere holte ich 2012 die Jahrestagung des Vereins für Sozialpolitik, der Vereinigung der Volkswirte im deutschsprachigen Raum, nach Göttingen und leitete die lokale Organisation. Die Tagung verlief erfolgreich und wurde von vielen Teilnehmern als sehr gelungen wahrgenommen. Ein Höhepunkt war sicherlich die Rede von Altkanzler Schröder zu den Arbeitsmarktreformen der Agenda 2010. Unter den Zuhörern im Hörsaal 011 befand sich auch Oskar Lafontaine. Dieses Aufeinandertreffen hat sogar zu einem Bericht in der satirischen Heute-Show geführt. Schließlich haben meine KollegInnen aus der entwicklungsökonomischen Gruppe und ich einen wichtigen Beitrag zum Aufstieg des Departments in Forschungsrankings leisten können. So ist das Department im vielbeachteten Handelsblatt-Ranking von Platz 26 vor 12 Jahren auf Platz 6 im deutschsprachigen Raum dieses Jahr aufgestiegen. In meinem Wirken spielt neben der Forschung die Politikberatung auch wegen der Bedeutung der Entwicklungszusammenarbeit, EZ, eine wichtige Rolle. Dementsprechend habe ich mich gemeinsam mit KollegInnen von anderen Standorten um größeren Austausch mit Praktikern im Ministerium, BMZ und den Durchführungsorganisationen GIZ, KfW, DIVEL bemüht. Diese Bemühungen sind im Allgemeinen auf ein positives Echo bei den KollegInnen aus der Praxis gestoßen und haben zu einer Verbesserung des Austauschs zwischen Wissenschaft und Praxis geführt. Das PECnet ist ein ständiges Forum des Austauschs und darüber hinaus gibt es eine Vielzahl von Kooperationen auf Projektebene, vor allem bei Wirkungsevaluationen und Projektexperimenten. Viele unserer AbsolventInnen arbeiten in den EZ-Organisationen und erleichtern dadurch Kontakt und Kooperation. Allerdings hatte ich mir hier mehr erhofft und musste feststellen, dass Kooperationen eher punktuell sind, stark von den beteiligten Personen abhängen und es kaum institutionalisierte Formen des Austausches gibt. Dafür kann es mehrere Gründe geben. Während wir Forscher hauptsächlich an Innovationen und vor allem publizierbaren Fragestellungen und Projekten interessiert sind, sind Praktiker vor allem an der erfolgreichen Umsetzung von Projekten interessiert, egal ob innovativ oder nicht. Diese Gegensätze reduzieren die Schnittmenge für Kooperationen im beiderseitigen Interesse. Darüber hinaus fehlen im Ministerium sowie den Durchführungsorganisationen Forschungsabteilungen, die eine natürliche Schnittstelle für Kooperationen mit der Wissenschaft bilden könnten. Schließlich erschweren die im internationalen Vergleich sehr geringen Forschungsausgaben und die generelle Wissenschaftsferne des Ministeriums die Kooperation erheblich. Dies führt mich zu meinem dritten Exkurs zur Erfahrung mit der Politikberatung. Zuerst möchte ich über meine eher ernüchternden Erfahrungen im wissenschaftlichen Beirat des BMZ von 2004 bis 2009 unter der Ministerin Wieczorek-Soll berichten. Mein Eindruck war, dass unsere Stellungnahmen auf ein eher geringes Interesse im Ministerium stießen. Sie schienen zu grundsätzlich zu sein, um den Praktikern im Tagesgeschäft zu helfen. Und strategische Fragen wurden von politischen Vorgaben geleitet, die man nicht gerne in Frage stellen wollte. Unter den Ministern Niebel 2009 bis 2013 und Müller seit 2013 wurde der wissenschaftliche Beirat ganz abgeschafft. Ich finde, dass man die Forschungsferne des Ministeriums auch in der Politik des BMZ erkennen kann. So erscheint es mir sehr fragwürdig, wie EZ in den letzten Jahren als Fluchtursachenbekämpfung umetikettiert wurde. Ohne sich genau mit ökonomischen, ökologischen und politischen Fluchtursachen auseinanderzusetzen, wird suggeriert, dass klassische EZ in den afrikanischen Herkunftsländern hier schnell und wirksam Abhilfe leisten kann. So sehr mich ein verstärktes deutsches Engagement in den ärmsten Ländern Afrikas freut, werden diese Maßnahmen kaum in angenommener Geschwindigkeit und Ausmaß zur Fluchtursachenbekämpfung beitragen. Ebenso ist es enttäuschend, dass das BMZ sich aus der Budgethilfe als Instrument der EZ zurückgezogen hat, obwohl eindeutige wissenschaftliche Evidenz vorliegt, dass Budgethilfe effektiver und effizienter als die jetzt wieder vermehrt genutzte kleinteilige Projekthilfe ist.
Since 2013, I've been a member of the UN Committee on Development Policy, a group of 25 academics from all over the world that advises the UN on development issues. My experience there has been mixed. One of our tasks is to write an annual report to the UN's Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, on the topics proposed by them. Since ECOSOC, in contrast to the Security Council, has little power, our reports have close to zero influence and are barely noticed within the UN system, let alone outside of it. Even institutions with no power consume tremendous intellectual and bureaucratic capacity, which is a huge problem. Partly to add relevance to our work, a second task has been to write papers and books on global economic governance, the Sustainable Development Goals, and other key development issues for the general public. This work has been widely noted and discussed in policy circles. Our third, and by far most important task, has been to decide which developing countries are placed on the list of so-called least developed countries. These countries are eligible for a range of preferences, including unilateral trade preferences, concessional aid, and access to special technical assistance. For the very important decision on the list, i.e., which country will be included, which will stay, and which countries will graduate from the LDC status, we have developed a transparent and criteria-driven process. By combining scientific expertise with the legitimacy of the UN, we have been able to increase transparency, depoliticize the selection, and thus create a valuable tool for assisting the worst of countries. From 2011 to 2014, I coordinated a chapter for the 5th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. I learned a lot and hope to have contributed a little to the overall success of this process. Looking back, 2 experiences stand out, and they are again somewhat mixed. The first concerns the role country governments play in influencing this work. An IPCC report consists of some 20 chapters, a technical summary put together by the chapter coordinators and the secretariat, and a shorter summary for policymakers that is negotiated line by line between the scientists and representatives from 180 plus country governments. This negotiation takes place over a week, day and night, and by consensus, i.e., any country can hold up the entire process. Countries use the setup to further their interests. For example, Germany tried to ensure that the summary was not too positive about the potential role of nuclear power in climate change mitigation. Brazil did not want to be blamed for cutting down the rainforest. China did not want to be named as the country mostly responsible for the increase in global emissions since 1990. And the USA tried to reject any responsibility for historical emissions prior to 1980, as no one knew about climate change back then. Despite these interventions to pursue particular interests, amazingly, nearly all countries collaborated in trying to put together a meaningful report. All but one. The one exception is Saudi Arabia, whose main aim was to sabotage the negotiations and to make the report as meaningless as possible. They came with the largest delegation, then divided the team into shifts to ensure that also at 3 a.m. they had well-rested negotiators ready to object to any formulation that might be construed as harmful to their interests as a fossil fuel producer. They objected about as often as all the other 180 plus countries combined, each time necessitating lengthy discussions and often compromises that watered down the report. It was shocking and frustrating to see how one country tried and often succeeded to hijack the process. By importing oil from Saudi Arabia, we implicitly finance this behavior. The second thing I learned at the IPCC is that we economists do not understand the political economy of climate policy well. We rightly believe that the most efficient way to tackle climate change is to have a uniform price for carbon emissions, either achieved via carbon tax or via emissions trading. What we disregard is that there are many players pursuing additional policies and actions to reduce emissions, including states, cities, firms, and even individual citizens. We therefore need to understand how these many individual mitigation efforts interact with the carbon tax or emissions trading. It turns out that an emissions trading system makes these additional policies ineffective. For example, if Germany subsidizes better insulation of buildings, the lower emissions from the building sector will just reduce the carbon price in the emissions trading system and thereby shift emissions elsewhere, with no net reduction in total emissions. This is not the case with a carbon tax. As the price for emissions has not changed, the reduced emissions from buildings will not be counteracted by higher emissions elsewhere. This is a powerful argument for a carbon tax and against emissions trading. All the more, it is regrettable that the climate policies recently adopted by the German government not only lack ambition, but rely on emissions trading instead of a carbon tax.
Wie manche von Ihnen wissen, bin ich ein Freund von Statistiken. Und so möchte ich im letzten Teil der Vorlesung ein paar Statistiken zu meiner Zeit in Göttingen präsentieren. Ich beginne mit der Lehre. Ich habe gerne unterrichtet, musste aber seit 2015 meine Lehre krankheitsbedingt immer weiter reduzieren. Das Prüfungsamt sagte mir, dass ich in meiner Göttinger Zeit in insgesamt 96 Lehrveranstaltungen 5.238 Bachelor- und Masterstudierende unterrichtet habe. Für etwas mehr als 10 Jahre Lehrtätigkeit mit vollem Deputat ist das höchstens durchschnittlich und reflektiert, dass sich meine Lehre verstärkt auf den Masterbereich konzentriert hat. Das sieht man auch an den Abschlussarbeiten. 96 betreuten Bachelorarbeiten stehen 150 Master- und Diplomarbeiten gegenüber. In jeder dieser Masterarbeiten mussten Studierende eine eigene empirische Analyse vorlegen. Was mich besonders freut, ist, dass nicht wenige dieser Arbeiten in überarbeiteter Form in Fachzeitschriften publiziert wurden. Ein großes Augenmerk meiner Tätigkeit in der Lehre lag auf der Doktorandenausbildung. Insgesamt wurden 76 DoktorandInnen mit mir als Erstbetreuer promoviert. Bei dem Symposium zu meinem 50. Geburtstag wurde aufgrund der Anzahl und der Art der Promotionen von ehemaligen von der Göttinger Schule gesprochen. Die meisten AbsolventInnen der Göttinger Schule arbeiten in der Wissenschaft oder in der entwicklungspolitischen Praxis. 16 sind ProfessorInnen, darunter an der ETH Zürich, Göttingen, Nürnberg, Kent, Southampton, Korea University und Universitäten in Bolivien, Chile, Indonesien, Indien, Pakistan, Philippinen, Vietnam und Tansania. 22 weitere sind auf akademischen Nachwuchsstellen, 9 arbeiten in Forschungsinstituten, 11 ehemalige arbeiten in Institutionen der Entwicklungszusammenarbeit wie Weltbank, African Development Bank, United Nations, Caribbean Development Bank, OECD, KfW und Ministerium. Einer, Thomas Otter, ist leider schon verstorben. Was Forschung betrifft, war ich recht aktiv bei der Akquise von Drittmitteln. Insgesamt habe ich ca. 7,4 Millionen Euro verausgabt. Nur so hatte ich ausreichende Finanzierung für meine DoktorandInnen und konnte empirische Forschungsprojekte, die häufig Datenerhebungen in Entwicklungsländern erforderten, durchführen. Ich habe mich gerne an größeren Verbundsforschungsprojekten beteiligt und sie zum Teil auch geleitet. Mir machte die Kooperation mit KollegInnen viel Spaß und diese Projekte bieten darüber hinaus zumeist eine längerfristige Finanzierung. So war ich in meiner Münchner und Göttinger Zeit insgesamt an 3 Sonderforschungsbereichen, 5 Graduiertenkollegs, 2 Forschergruppen und einem Langfristvorhaben beteiligt. Bis jetzt habe ich 135 Artikel in referierten Zeitschriften und 30 referierte Buchbeiträge publiziert. Ebenso habe ich 8 Bücher herausgegeben. Besonders erfreulich ist, dass meine Forschung in den letzten Jahren viel zitiert wird und damit zumindest in der Wissenschaft eine gewisse Wirkung entfaltet hat. Wie die Grafik zeigt, hat es allerdings ziemlich lange gedauert, bis meinen Arbeiten diese Aufmerksamkeit zuteil wurde. Das deutet auf den viel langsameren Publikationsprozess in der Ökonomie hin, etwa im Vergleich zu den Naturwissenschaften oder der Medizin. Das sieht man auch daran, dass die 10 bisher am meisten zitierten Arbeiten alle vor 2010 publiziert wurden.
Now that I've presented a range of metrics about my time in Göttingen, I want to spend my 4th digression on the problems and tensions that an increasing reliance on such metrics for career decisions of researchers can have. In particular, the increasing pressure on young researchers to publish in highly ranked journals presupposes that these journals make decisions based on objective quality standards alone. Yet this assumes that all actors in the publication process, i.e. authors, referees, and editors, strictly adhere to a largely unwritten ethical code. While there is vibrant debate among specialists, see publicationethics.org, Adherence to this ethical code is insufficiently monitored. This ethical code includes at least the following elements. Although most are not paid, editors are expected to seriously engage with each submission, find the most appropriate referees, and manage the process in a timely manner. Their decisions should be based purely on quality as assessed by the referees, and should not be influenced by personal preferences of the editor or the standing of the author. Conflicts of interest are addressed in a transparent way. Referees should, without pay, provide a thorough and detailed review of a submission in a timely manner. They should be guided solely by quality and not by personal preferences. Also here, conflicts of interest will be revealed, usually leading to them being replaced by another referee. Lastly, authors should not submit the same paper to 2 journals at the same time. They should cite all relevant literature and other sources of ideas. They must not manipulate data to suit the results, even if done as part of data cleaning, outlier removal, or sample selection. And they should not try to manipulate the referee process for, by example, suggesting friends as referees. In practice, the adherence to most elements of this ethical code is rarely checked in economics journals, and there are few formal mechanisms to address problems. It is probably true that most of the time this code is more or less followed, but we do not really know. Let me now discuss 2 episodes I was involved in to illustrate what can go wrong. The first example is on the role of hepatitis B in explaining the phenomenon of missing women in Asia. Amartya Sen and I had claimed that some 100 million women in Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa were missing, in the sense that they had died as a result of gender inequalities in access to food and health care. In 2005, Emily Oster, then a Ph.D. student at Harvard, claimed that most of the male excess in these regions was due to the widespread prevalence of the hepatitis B virus, which increased the likelihood of infected women to have sons. So, rather than discrimination, the missing women issue was mostly due to biology. The publication process of this paper was unusual, to say the least. On February 5th, 2005, Oster posted a first incomplete draft on her website and sent it out for comments also to me. On February 28th, Harvard professor Robert Barrow praised her paper in his column in Business Week, relishing that he could use the paper to criticize his colleague Amartya Sen and his claims of gender discrimination. In March, Oster submits the paper to the Journal of Political Economy, a top 5 economics journal. The responsible editor was the star professor Stephen Levitt from the University of Chicago, popularly known for his book Freakonomics. In May, Levitt publishes an article in the popular online magazine Slate on Oster's paper, calling her findings extremely compelling and mentioning that it was soon to be published. This was before Oster had received a first reply and referee reports from the JPE. Not surprisingly, the paper was then accepted very quickly and published in the JPE in December of 2005. There is, of course, nothing wrong with publishing an important paper quickly. Yet, one may question Levitt's mixing of his role as editor of a top journal with being a cheerleader for the paper in his role as a journalist. More importantly, however, it turns out that the haste with which this apparently politically desirable analysis was pushed had a real cost in preventing adequate scrutiny of the paper before publication. That scrutiny only took place after its publication. Several papers appeared, including from me, which identified major gaps in the analysis. In 2008, a paper was able to conclusively show that there was no economically significant link between carrying the hepatitis B virus and the likelihood to have sons. Oster, by then a professor at the University of Chicago, also did a new empirical analysis and also concluded that her original findings had been wrong. However, neither she nor the JPE formally retracted the paper, which is still listed on her CV. Stephen Levitt has never been held accountable to anyone for his dubious role in pushing the publication of the paper. Instead, when writing about the episode later, he praised Oster for her courage to admit she had been wrong. He had nothing to say about his own deeply problematic role. second episode is about how Khalid Zaman, an academic working in Pakistan, had devised a method to increase his output in international refereed journals. I knew him as I had been the external examiner on his Ph.D. I then encouraged him to publish more in international refereed journals. To implement my suggestion, he devised the following scheme. First, he created an email address, Stephan Klasen @yahoo.com. He then submitted papers to Economic Modeling, a good but not top Elsevier journal. In his submissions, he suggested me as a referee and provided the email address Stephan Klasen @yahoo.com. Astonishingly, the editors of Economic Modeling always used his suggestion and requested a total of 12 referee reports on his papers from Stephan Klasen @yahoo.com within 3 years. In my name, Zaman then wrote highly positive reports on his own papers and was able to publish these 12 papers in Economic Modeling between 2012 and 2014 before the fraud was uncovered. In 2015, Elsevier retracted these 12 papers and 4 published in other journals. In a message apologizing for the identity theft, Zaman partly blamed me for his actions. Remember, sir, you asked me to publish in papers in journals with impact factor, asking why I was wasting my papers in some ordinary journals. Now I have 186 publications with a combined impact factor of 112, and I'm out of a job. These are 2 particularly egregious examples of what can go wrong. But it is very likely that quite frequently elements of the ethical code are disregarded, leading to biased publication decisions with huge implications for academic careers. What can be done? First, the ethical code must be communicated and much more clearly and taught to PhD students and young researchers. While the issue of plagiarism is usually addressed in economics programs, other ethical issues in publishing are rarely discussed. There should be much more awareness and guidance than is presently the case. Second, there must be a process, maybe organized by the publisher or the academic society that runs the journal, to review ethically dubious actions and decisions by editors and referees. Third, conflicts of interest of editors and referees need to be documented and dealt with. Fourth, it should not be possible to suggest referees, especially using Yahoo email addresses. Lastly, there must be more transparency in the use and cleaning of self-generated data. While such reforms might help, the tension between the ever-increasing publication pressure and our fragile ethical code guiding publication process is likely to remain. Moreover, it's unclear how much additional bureaucratic burden we can impose on unpaid referees and editors before they refuse to serve in this function. Ultimately, we need to be aware of the imperfections of the publishing process. We need to recognize that the publication outlet is an imperfect signal of the quality of a paper and should therefore not be used as the overriding criterion for decisions affecting entire academic careers. Instead, we should consider the impact of a paper and critically assess its merits by thorough reading and discussion.
As you can see, my life was marked by many unexpected twists and turns. As with my life, development economics and policy in Germany and internationally has also undergone many changes. If there are common lessons to my experiences and the changes I witnessed, I would emphasize 3. First, it is important to be intellectually and ideologically open-minded. The world is not black and white. There is no NGO free from self-interest, and the World Bank is neither only friend nor only foe of the poor. Parts of the UN are frustrating talk shops, but parts form the backbone of the only globally legitimate form of global governance. Second, and closely linked to the first, a critical attitude is of central importance. This is as important for assessing development policy as it is for assessing research output in academic journals. Third, one should always be ready to seize opportunities. My life trajectory, the buildup of development economics here in Göttingen, as well as the renaissance of development research in Germany, are all testimony to what can happen if we grab the opportunities that are presented to us.
Zum Abschluss der Vorlesung möchte ich den vielen Menschen danken, die meinen beruflichen Weg in den letzten Jahrzehnten begleitet haben, mit mir zusammengearbeitet oder mich unterstützt haben. Ich kann unmöglich alle mit Namen nennen, möchte aber ein paar Personen stellvertretend für viele andere namentlich erwähnen. Zuerst möchte ich meiner Familie danken. Meine Frau Christine hat die viel größere Last bei der Kindererziehung und im Haushalt getragen und mir damit Freiräume für meine Berufstätigkeit geschaffen. In den letzten Jahren hat sie aufgrund meiner Krankheit diese Last weitgehend alleine tragen müssen. Dafür bin ich sehr dankbar. Meinen 4 Kindern, Lukas, Nikolas, Sophia und Jeremias, möchte ich ebenfalls dafür danken, dass sie mich mit einer großen Selbstverständlichkeit in Pflege und anderen Tätigkeiten unterstützt haben. Ich möchte meinem Team von Ärzten, Therapeuten und Pflegekräften danken. Susanne Petri von der MHH Hannover und Jan Koch von der UMG Göttingen haben mich hervorragend medizinisch versorgt und mich vor allem auch über neue Studien und wissenschaftliche Erkenntnisse zu Therapien und Umgang mit dieser schrecklichen Krankheit auf dem Laufenden gehalten. Meinen langjährigen Physiotherapeuten Michael Jüngling und Jörg Scheibe sowie meinem Logopäden Martin Pinke danke ich für ihr Engagement und ihre therapeutische Begleitung. Und ich danke den Pflegekräften der Diakonie für ihren unermüdlichen Einsatz.
Hier am Lehrstuhl möchte ich zunächst meinen beiden persönlichen Assistenten Henrik Buschmann und Saidullah Mohammed für ihre treue und engagierte Unterstützung im Büro, der Mensa und auf Reisen danken. Ich danke Michaela Beckmann, Sabine Jäb, Christine Fuhlroth und Susanne Pritz für ihre langjährige Unterstützung im Sekretariat. Frau Pritz möchte ich besonders für ihr loyales Engagement für mich und meine Belange in den letzten Jahren danken. Fili Novak-Lehmann und Ima Martinez Sarsoso haben eng mit mir in der Forschung zusammengearbeitet und daraus sind viele schöne Publikationen entstanden. Ich danke beiden auch für vielfältige administrative Unterstützung, zum Beispiel bei unserem Masterstudiengang oder der Leitung des European Development Research Networks und für ihre langjährige Freundschaft. Melanie Große hat mich über die Jahre bei der Organisation von vielen Konferenzen wie der Veranstaltung 2012 und beim Management von Verbundprojekten kompetent und effizient unterstützt. Großer Dank gebührt meinen DoktorandInnen und Postdocs, die die Göttinger Schule mit Leben erfüllen und deren Forschung und Lehre entscheidend für den Erfolg und die Sichtbarkeit unserer Gruppe sind. Stellvertretend für alle möchte ich Ken Hartgen, Isabel Günther, Melanie Große und Sebastian Vollmer erwähnen, die 2016 das wunderschöne Symposium zu meinem 50. Geburtstag organisiert haben, zu dem auch die meisten ehemaligen DoktorandInnen nach Göttingen kamen. Mein Vorgänger Hermann Sauter und Eberhard Weiershäuser, der Leiter unseres ehemaligen Vereins, haben uns dankenswerterweise über die Jahre mit Rat und finanzieller Unterstützung begleitet. Im VWL-Department möchte ich zunächst Gerhard Rübel danken. Er fing mit mir 2003 an. Während ich mich auf die Forschung und den Aufbau der Entwicklungsökonomie konzentrieren konnte, übernahm er das Amt des Studiendekans und übte das Amt 15 Jahre lang aus. Er managte effizient und geräuschlos die Umstellung auf Bachelor- und Masterabschlüsse, organisierte mehrere Akkreditierungsrunden und half bei der Einführung neuer Studiengänge. Wir alle haben davon profitiert, dass er diese große administrative Last alleine trug und sein Amt so hervorragend ausübte. Ebenso möchte ich meinen langjährigen KollegInnen Renate Ohr, Robert Schwager, Kilian Bietzer, Claudia Keser und Hartmut Berghoff für die positive und kooperative Stimmung im Department danken. Thomas Kneip kenne ich schon aus unserer gemeinsamen Münchner Zeit und ich möchte mich für die vielfältigen Kooperationen in Forschung und Lehre über die Jahre bedanken. Von der Entwicklungsgruppe möchte ich mich besonders bei Marcela Ibanez, Holger Strulig, Sebastian Vollmer und Jan Ley für die Zusammenarbeit für Forschung, Verbundprojekten und im Ausbau der Entwicklungsökonomie Forschung bedanken. Christina Kiskatos hat auch entwicklungsökonomische Interessen und bereichert die Aktivitäten unserer Gruppe enorm. Dagmar Sarkowski danke ich für das hervorragende Management des Departments und für die Unterstützung unserer Initiativen zur Förderung des internationalen Austauschs von Studierenden und Lehrkräften. Unsere Fakultät ist im Großen und Ganzen von einem Geist der Zusammenarbeit zwischen BWL und VWL geprägt, was nicht selbstverständlich ist. Daher danke ich meinen KollegInnen aus der BWL. Ralf Parkin danke ich für das exzellente Management der Fakultät und für seine Unterstützung vieler meiner Initiativen. Die enge Zusammenarbeit mit KollegInnen aus der Agrarfakultät habe ich als echte Bereicherung und großen Vorteil Göttingens empfunden. Dafür möchte ich mich besonders bei Teja Czarnke, Stefan von Kramon, Maike Wollny und Bernhard Brümmer bedanken. Bei Martin Qualm möchte ich mich darüber hinaus für mehrere gemeinsame Publikationen und seine hervorragende Leitung des Global Food Graduiertenkollegs bedanken, die für mich Vorbild für die Leitung unseres Graduiertenkollegs war. Tatjana Kribokova, Xiao Yu und Marcelle Ibanez, den 3 ProfessorInnen des Courant-Zentrums, danke ich für gemeinsame Forschung und Zusammenarbeit beim Aufbau des Zentrums.
Über Göttingen hinaus möchte ich mich bei KollegInnen in Deutschland für Zusammenarbeit und Unterstützung bedanken. Mit KollegInnen aus Hannover verbindet mich unser gemeinsames Graduiertenkolleg, eine Forschergruppe und ein Langfristvorhaben. Für die produktive Zusammenarbeit danke ich insbesondere Lukas Menkhoff, Hermann Weibel, Ulrike Grote, Martin Gassebner und dem kürzlich verstorbenen Andreas Wagener. Der Entwicklungsländerausschluss des Vereins für Sozialpolitik ist das zentrale Forum für die wiedererstarkte deutsche Entwicklungsökonomie. Die Jahrestreffen bringen KollegInnen und Freunde aus dem gesamten deutschsprachigen Raum zusammen. Stellvertretend für viele möchte ich Michael Grimm, Axel Dreher und Dirk Herzer für langjährige gemeinsame Forschung und Zusammenarbeit bei vielen Initiativen danken. Katja Michaelova und Joachim von Braun haben sowohl den Ausschuss als auch uns hier in Göttingen mit Gutachten und Beiratstätigkeiten sehr unterstützt. Von meinen Münchner KollegInnen möchte ich John Komlos dafür danken, dass er meine Rückkehr ins deutsche System ermöglicht hat. Monika Schnitzer und Klaus Schmidt danke ich für die freundliche Aufnahme in der Fakultät und die Freundschaft seitdem. Dem kürzlich verstorbenen BWL-Kollegen Arnold Picot danke ich für seine Unterstützung bei der Schaffung des Courant-Zentrums hier in Göttingen und dem Einwerben unserer Absolventenpreise durch die Sartorius AG. Mit der KfW haben wir eine Reihe von gemeinsamen Projekten bearbeitet. Sie unterstützt den Entwicklungsländerausschluss mit mehreren Preisen und ist ein beliebter Arbeitgeber unserer AbsolventInnen. Für die enge Zusammenarbeit möchte ich insbesondere Iva Terberger und Joachim Heidebrecht danken. Das BMZ hat einige unserer Forschungsprojekte sowie Tagungen finanziell unterstützt. Dafür danke ich insbesondere Michaela Zintel und Peter Kral.
I also want to thank colleagues in Europe for collaboration in research and networking activities. To be voted in as a member of the European Development Research Network, the network of leading development economists in Europe, in 2002, opened up new opportunities to network, to promote development research, and to get valuable feedback on one's research. From 2015 to 2018, I was elected president of the EUDN. I want to particularly thank François Bourguignon, Jean-Philippe Plateau, Eliana Laferrara, Jan Gunning, and Halvor Melhum for their cooperation and support over the years. For nearly 10 years, I was co-editor of the Review of Income and Wealth. I wish to thank Conchita D'Ambrosio and Marcel Timmer for their collaboration in this sometimes quite difficult and thankless task. In addition, I thank Andrea Cornia, Ron Davies, Philip Verwimp, Janneke Peters, and Sonia Barotra for excellent collaboration in research and other initiatives. Of my colleagues based in the USA, I would like to thank Jenny Aker, Betty Sadoulet, and Petra Todd for their support of the Courant Center and our research training group. Sanjay Reddy and I want to thank for many years of academic exchange and friendship. Emma Rothschild, I want to particularly thank for enabling a path back to academia after my stay at the World Bank by offering me a postdoc position in Cambridge. And of course, I am deeply indebted to Amartya Sen, who not only shaped my research agenda, but also supported me throughout my career with advice, references, and contacts. Lastly, I want to thank colleagues in international organizations for collaboration and support over the years. In particular, I thank Juan Antonio Campo, Juan Antonio Alonso, Andrea Cornea, Diane Elson, Mark Flerbet, and Matthias Bruckner from the UN Committee on Development Policy for collaboration in research and policy advice. Over the years, I worked closely with UNDP on their well-known human development and gender indicators. A particular thanks goes to Milorad Kovacevic, who facilitated much of this work. Johannes Jutting of the OECD, I thank for our collaboration on their gender indicators. At the World Bank, I thank Francisco Ferreira, Isis Gadis, and Dina Abugaida for years of collaboration and friendship. As you can see, I had a wonderful time here in Göttingen, and I still had many plans, both professionally and personally. All the more it hurts that my illness is now cutting them short. I wish my successor, Andreas Fuchs, as much joy and luck as I have experienced over the years.
Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for coming